recording now, so we're good to go. Okay, so today we're going to talk about basic XSLT and how you can leverage XSLT to copy data in your InfoPath forms from one data source to another using either code, which we'll look at the code for that, or qRules. Let me just find my slide buttons. I'm moderately incompetent at some of these things. So you can't hear me. It might be because you don't have the webinar audio set up correctly, and you might want to look at Marcy's note in chat about that. Our goals are to give you something that's relevant, to be timely about it. If you've suffered through any of my webinars before, you'll realize that I'm not always as timely as I could be. I sometimes spend more time talking than maybe I should, but I like to make sure I've explained myself thoroughly. And we'll be doing our demos live, so if I mess it up, that's just human. It happens. And if you send us your contact info, we'll get you our samples. And so, you know, these samples that I've got set up that I'll be demoing, the secondary data sources are XML data sources in the form, so you'll be able to just run them, and we'll include the code files and everything. So what is XSL? The acronym stands for Extensible Style Sheet Language. The W3 org, which is the governing body for this standard, describes it as a language for expressing style sheets, or a file that describes how to display an XML document of a given type. Now, a lot of times XSL is used to convert XML data into things like web pages. Right, but for us as InfoPath developers, it's also very useful for things like converting XML from one schema to another schema, and that's really what we'll be talking about today. InfoPath views are XSLT files, even though the file extension is XSL. They are transforms. The T stands for transformation. So an XSLT is an extensible style sheet language transformation. There's a little bit of kind of loosey-goosey confusion around some of these terms and some of the things, like the fact that we use XSL as a file extension for XSLTs, or we can use the XSLT file extension. What happened is the draft specification for XSL was split into three different parts: XSL transformation, XSL formatting objects, and the XML path language, which ended up being named XPath. And that's kind of the basis for this kind of less than strict naming stuff that you'll run into. But in general, just know that InfoPath views are XSLTs, that when you're changing your data, it's a transformation. XSL uses XPath, which we discussed last week, to select data from the source XML that we're transforming. So your XSL leverages XPath. Your XSLT file will leverage XPath to select nodes from your initial XML and as part of the transform. This means that XPath functions are also available to you in your XSLT. So when you create an XSLT, you can use functions, XPath functions like concat. Hopefully that makes sense. Moving on. Where can you use it? Okay, so it's helpful when you're investigating issues in an InfoPath view. It's nice to be able to read XSLT, or you know, to at least not be intimidated by it, to feel comfortable that you can kind of pick through what's going on, to know some of the syntax. And it's also helpful with extending InfoPath, and I'm going to show you just a little brief example of that. You can use it in SharePoint Designer. You know, there's that design, and there's the code view. Data view web parts leverage XSLT pretty heavily. You can change other web parts to the XSLT editable code, so that you can go in, dig around in there, and maybe tweak things further than you were able to originally. With code or qRules in your InfoPath form, you can transform data to copy it from one data source to another. And that's what we're going to look at. Because, you know, if you're a qRules user and if you've used copy table, then you know it's limited to just when the schemas match. We can use the transform command in qRules if we can write an XSLT and do that, do the mismatched schema scenario much more simply. So InfoPath's relationship with XSLT, as we mentioned, is the views are XSLT. It uses 1.0 just like it uses XPath 1.0. That link there will take you to the MSDN page that tells you about the specifications that InfoPath matches. That's important to know so that you don't get confused or in a situation where you're searching online and trying to find things that you might be able to leverage in your XSLT or your XPath. Knowing that it uses the 1.0 specification keeps you from wandering down a path that InfoPath won't go. Okay. Now, manual view changes, if you save your form as source files and you make manual view changes, sometimes they will round trip, sometimes they will not. And when I say round trip, I mean if you open that form back up in design mode and you make a manual change to the view, sometimes these changes we make in the view or even in the manifest via working with the form source files, sometimes those will be maintained and sometimes InfoPath will blow them away. There's a link here to using preserve code blocks. I really don't like preserve code blocks. I really don't, because what you get in a form when you use a preserve code block is, I'll show you. I'll make a note of that. You get, if you haven't seen it before, you get literally where your controls would be. You get a little thing that says preserve code block, and any changes you need to make there, off you have to go to the view file and change it in the XSL. So I try to avoid any of the types of changes that require a preserve code block. The only way to know whether your manual change is going to require that is to try it, and so make your change and then go back into your form and make a little, I'm talking about copies of your form, of course, because you would never just only have your source files. You would always make sure you had a backup unless you like rework. And so you would go ahead and work in your source files, make your change, save your form, open it up in design mode in InfoPath, make another change to the view, save it, and then reopen it and make sure that your manual view changes had indeed been maintained. If they have, you're probably going to round trip okay. If they haven't, then your choices are preserve code block, or every single time you're done designing your form, you have to go and make your manual change again. Okay, so it's just something to be aware of, something to be cautious of. But I'm going to show you a cool change that you can do that does round trip. Figuring out how to use it. So that's the important part, right? Just like with XPath, how do I use XSLT? How do I learn how to build these? I've got some links for you here. This first one is kind of a neat little overview. He's talking pretty specifically about data view web parts, but he has a nice readable definition of these different tags that you're going to run into, and I think that's helpful. There is a tutorial at w3schools.com. I find that sometimes the W3 Schools tutorials can be a little controversial. There's some folks who believe they're not teaching best practices, and there's other folks who believe that they're too simplistic. But honestly, as far as getting a grip on some of the basics, I think they're just fine. Don't treat anything except for a specification as the ultimate truth, but I think that they're definitely fine for getting a grip on some of the basics. It's free. It's got some good little online you try it type of editors, and I think it's perfectly appropriate place to start wrapping your head around the basics. This link right here is on recursion, and we're going to look just briefly at that. My skill set for explaining recursion is probably a little limited because it does, like I said, make my head blow up. But this is a really good article that I found on it that I felt did a thorough job of explaining it, and it made me feel when I read it like I had a better grip on recursion in XSLT. If you're really adventurous or you can't sleep at night, do give the specification a try. You can read through the specification. And this Stack Overflow question had a bunch of good tutorials and resources. As far as actually applying transforms, we're going to look at two of these options. One is using Visual Studio, but I know not everybody has Visual Studio installed. And if you're not a developer, you probably don't. And so in that case, to test your transform, you might need to try an online tester. If you do have Visual Studio, you probably would use that instead of building your own. But in case you want to build your own, this particular article, which I see I left a trailing comma after, does have some information that might be helpful. So let's move on to the demo, and we're just going to look at some of these different things that we've talked about, or that I've talked about. Let me figure out how to share my screen. Sorry, some days are just better than others for me when it comes to some of this modern technology, right? Sometimes I do really well with things like Link, and sometimes I don't. So I'm just going to leave my link screen up here until I see that, okay, it looks like my screen is being shared. Speaking of recursion, see how it shows my screen sharing, my screen sharing, my screen sharing all the way through? So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. And let's start by taking a look at what we see in Visual Studio when we create a new XSLT file. So if I create a brand new XSLT file in Visual Studio, I'm going to get this. This is my default. And what this XSLT will do is, given an XML input, it will produce an exact copy of whatever I gave it. Okay, so you can see how that could not be terribly useful, but it is a good example of recursion, because we have right here our template, and for our template we're matching every attribute and every node. And then right here in the copy section, we're applying that same template. So when we hit apply templates, it moves it right back up here to the template match. And this allows us to copy every single element and attribute recursively. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on this, and we're going to go ahead and run this in debug. Now, if you do have Visual Studio, when you open up something like an XSLT file, you're going to have an XML menu, and you can start XSLT debugging. Now, you can see down here in the properties that we currently don't have an input or an output file. You can enter an input file here manually, or if there isn't one, you'll be prompted for one when you start your debugging. And so we're going to debug this file, which I've helpfully named complicated data, that we're going to be using for the rest of our demos. And this XSLT is just simply going to make a copy of it. So Visual Studio is loading that guy up for us. And you can see, here's my original XML. This file here is going to be my output, okay? And my breakpoint's just been hit. And it's going to execute this apply template statement for this node, complicated data, which is my root node. So I'll hit continue, and you can see now it's hitting it for complicated group. And I'll hit continue, and now for story. And let's look at what our XML file is looking like. So we've copied complicated data, complicated group, story, right? And I'll go ahead and execute again. And so what's happening here is we're hitting, every time we hit apply templates, we're hitting the template match, which is hitting apply templates, right? And so I'll just hit, right, again, we hit template match, template match, template match, apply templates, template match. Okay, so you can see how this is walking through, and as it walks through, we're copying over our data, and we're ending up with an exact copy. Now, an exact copy is not useful to us, and I went ahead and just hit execute to finish things up. I've got errors. What on earth could it be talking about with errors? And so now we've walked through everything. We've got an exact copy of our XSLT, of our original XML. If we go look at our forms here. Let me show you. This is my form that I've got set up with code. So if we go look at our forms, what I would like to do is I would like to copy this data here from my complicated group. You can see it's got a repeating group, and it's got some nested folders, and it's got some values in the folders. I want to copy this data and take a note here where I've got publisher, name and date, and then copyright date and holder. I want to copy this data into my main data source, where I also have a repeating book group. And I do happen to have these same folders, wouldn't have to. And I've got things with different names and in slightly different orders than they are in my original data source. Now, the fact that I happen to have these grouping folders in here, it doesn't matter, right? My data structure could be anything I wanted here, and I would be able to, as long as there was an appropriate methodology to transform this, as long as I wanted this data over there, I could create a transform to do it. The big deal is that for every single one of these complicated groups, what I really want to do is I want to create a book over here in my main data source. And so And the first thing we do is, I'm going to close this guy, is we take a look at our original data, and this is what the XML looks like. The next thing it's good to know is what your target looks like. So I know what my original XML looks like. How do I know what my target looks like? Well, in my case, I like to just use the template XML file from my XSN. So what I usually do is I use a program called 7-Zip, and I'll usually use 7-Zip and just extract my files. And so over here I've got my, whoops, that's my actual code files. Let's just do that. Actually, I've got the form open, so I can't do that. But what I'd usually do is I'd extract my files, and then I'd grab the template XML. Template XML is one of your form files that basically defines what the main data source looks like. You could get the same result if you just opened your form and did file save and just saved a blank, right? But this gives you your basic XML structure that's created by your form. It also includes any defaults that are not formulaic. Okay, so anything that's not created by a formula that is a default is going to show up. Boy, I am just determined to click the wrong buttons this morning. I hope everybody's feeling patient. So here we go. Open a file, and we're going to open up template XML. So this is my target, right? My target looks like this. Here's my fields node, and then here's books, and here's book. And so this is what I want my end result to look like, because I'm going to create book nodes for each of my complicated group nodes. So to create my XSLT, I actually started with that. Okay, back we go. Let me get this guy out of the way here. To create my XSLT, I actually kind of started with this structure. So if we go back over here, this is my book's XSLT. You can see that what I've got here in the center, right, is pretty much that structure. So what I did is, let's just do it over here. So what I did was, here in my XSLT, I replaced this, right, with my, boy, I really hope I have some ideas to what's on my clipboard right now, because I'm starting to think maybe I didn't. Let's close that. Let's see, Control Z. I did not have what I thought on my clipboard. Let's copy that. Back we go. Okay, so what I did was I said, okay, this is basically what I want my schema to look like, right? I need it to look like this. This is my basic. Now you can see right off the bat I've got an error because I haven't defined my. So over here you can see I did define that. How do I find that namespace? It's right here in template XML, right? So I need to define that namespace. So I go grab my namespace definition. Back we go here. I just kind of want to show you, and this is not, I'm sure there's a more elegant way to do this, and I'm sure there's people with deeper XSL knowledge who can write something extremely elegant that will do what I need to do, but I don't have that deep level of XSL knowledge. However, I do have enough knowledge to be able to create a simple XSL that's going to allow me to do what I need to do in almost every scenario that I need. And in this scenario, what I need to do is I need to create nodes that look like this out of stuff that looks like this. And so the best way for me personally to start is with my target XML, what I need it to look like at the end. So that's why I'm walking through this way with you, so you can kind of see what the logic was for me when I created this guy. So the next thing I needed to do was I needed to understand what I was going to match on. And I'm going to match on my root right here, which is complicated data. So I added template match equals complicated data. And so I changed this, right? So instead of template match equals this and this, I'm matching on complicated data because that's my root node. I want it to find that node, and then I want it to do something. What do I want it to do? Well, I want it for each of these complicated groups to create a book group. So the next thing I did was I added a for each statement, right? I said for each, select complicated group. And we'll just do that here. For each. There it is. And, I hope this isn't too tedious, you walking through, but I kind of wanted to show what my thought process is when I try to wrap my head around one of these. It tends to be just very much a a methodical, what's my output need to be, and how do I get my input in for that output. So now at this point, I know that I'm going to match on complicated group, and that I'm going to select for each complicated group. And if I look here, I've got 1, 2, I've got 3 of these guys, right? And so if I were to run this right now, I should see output that gave me 3 book nodes, right? And you know, you can test it at any point. And so if I run this right now, right, I get 3 book nodes. Look at that. And so that's great. That lets me know I'm progressing in the way I want to. So finally, all I need to do is, I know I'm matching on complicated group, and I'm creating a book node for each one of them. So now all I've got to do is use value of select. Let's pop back over here so you can see value of select to get the values that are currently here. So I want the value of select story. I want the value of select author. When I get into my publisher info, you see how I've got to indicate publisher and then date, because that's our XPath, publisher and then date. And here I want publisher and then name, for name inside the publisher info. So if we run this one, we should see an output that is 3 books with my original data in there. And indeed, that's what we have. Now, if you're not using Visual Studio, testing becomes a little more challenging. However, it's still extremely important, because otherwise you just kind of, I don't know, if you can't test your stuff, if you can't run your stuff and debug, you're just kind of smashing into the wall again and again and again. And I've been there and I've done that. And I really encourage you to find tools you can use to test things. Because if you can test things in bits and pieces, then you know when you're going the right direction, and you know when you're progressing, and you know when you're doing the wrong thing. And if you're not able to create an environment wherein you can see your mistakes, wherein you can see your progress, then you're just sort of flailing around and hoping for the best. And when I first started learning this stuff, that's what I was doing. And so I've got nothing but empathy if you're flailing around and hoping for the best. But I encourage you to find and develop ways to methodically work through these processes, because once you can methodically start working through, here's where I am in the in the XML tree, here's where I need to be. When you can find a way that works with your brain to methodically work through these things, all of a sudden the doors swing wide open. I kid you not. So this tool is free, and it's an online tester. And they're saying basically enter your XML, enter your XSLT, and here's going to be your result. So if you don't have something like Visual Studio, and let's go back here to my beginning one that we know is kind of weird and not complete. I'm going to copy this in, and no, okay, I don't have syntax highlighting, and I don't have those helpful IntelliSense things that I would have in Visual Studio. But it certainly beats not having anything. It beats working in the dark. So here's my somewhat finished XSLT, the one where I don't have my value of selects, right? And my complicated data XML, which is my source XML. And I'm going to copy that and paste it in over here. And I'm going to run my transformation. Isn't that pretty? He has an in progress and everything. And I can look down here, and I can scroll down, and I can see that I am getting, those 3 book nodes that I was hoping for. And if I change to my completed XSLT here, let's pop that in there. This is stuff that if you're working with InfoPath, you can learn this. Don't think you can't learn this, or that this is beyond you. It's not. It's absolutely not. But you do need to get a tool set that allows you to learn this. And you can see how tools like this are going to help, are going to be helpful. If you have a mistake in here, you're going to see that you have a mistake just in terms of how things are returned for you, right? We are matching on the for each at this point, but we're not matching here because we don't have the initial group. So I just think that these kinds of online tools can be very helpful for you if you don't have a tool set like Visual Studio, and not everybody does. If you're not a developer, it's kind of a big spend to have around just for things like XML debugging. And there are other tools you can purchase. If you're going to purchase a tool, I encourage you to find something that has a free trial so you can mess around with it a bit and make sure it's the kind of thing that will be useful to you. Okay, so enough on the tool lecture. I'm sure you guys are bored of that by now. Let's move on. So moving on, let's take a look at how we're going to apply this transform. So this is my code version. Okay, and I've got two versions of this template. One has code, one does not, and I did not mark myself busy in Skype. Let me do that right now. And let me just reply. Okay, back we go. So here we are, and we've got our same data sources that we've been looking at, and what we want to do is we want to apply that transform. Now, we're not walking into this blind. We already know our transform works. We've already tested that, and that would be my first thing that I would really encourage you to do. Make sure you've got working bits and pieces before you start trying to put these together, okay? And so now here is my code. And let's just see. I've got code on my button. Right? It's the button transform that I've named button transform. It's a clicked event on that button. I have here, first off, just some string declarations. Theta, you wouldn't have to do it this way. I kind of did it this way, so it might be easier if you guys wanted to mess with this code a little bit for you to change things. So you can see here's the name of my transform. Let's pop back over in design mode and take a look at my resource files. Data, resource files. So I've added that transform as a resource file. Its name is books XSLT. Okay, so here's the name of my transform, and I am keeping it as a form file. You could have it external to your form. I tend to like things like this to be kept as resource files with my form. I don't have to worry about people being able to connect to them. And my source data, the data source name is complicated data. And so if we look here in our data sources, we've got complicated data as my data source name. And my source path, the node I'm going to select and apply the transform to is complicated data, as we saw when we were looking at that. And then if we go and look here, my destination path is books. So I used kind of similar syntax to what we use in the transform command in qRules. You wouldn't have to, but at any rate, here's my destination node where I'm going to be putting all of this new XML that I'm generating. Okay, I've got a basic try-catch statement. This is a browser form, and browser forms don't allow us to use Windows message boxes. So to catch my exception, I went ahead and I created an error node in a data source named form logic, and I'm putting my exception there because I can't pop up a message with my exception, and I need some exception handling because you know, if stuff doesn't work, I need to know why it's not working. And what if it doesn't work in the browser and it works in preview? Lord knows I've run into that before, you know, and I need to know, I need that information. I need that exception information. And sometimes you want to surface that exception information to your users. Okay, so that is why I've got that. So what we're doing here is we're applying the transform. We are creating a new instance of the XSL compiled transform class, and we are creating a new XML document. Okay, we are loading up, and I named it XSLT document because I'm loading up this XSLT into it. So I'm loading up this XSLT, and then I'm loading that into my transform. I create a string writer, okay, and then I apply the transform. And when I apply the transform, I am passing in my source, my data source there, and my source path. So I'm applying the transform to this particular node, okay? I'm applying the transform here to, let me go take a look at this guy again so I can show you. Applying the transform to the node that I set up there in my other variables, right? I'm applying it there. Okay, so that's all that's going on in that load is I'm just in that line. I'm just saying, look, transform this particular node. I've already loaded up the XSLT document. Okay, so the transform says, okay, I know what the transform is. I know what my XSLT is. And now I said, okay, here's the data I want you to transform. It's like, okay, I'm all over that, right? And then I have a string writer as the result of that. That is my result. That is going to have the correct XML that I want to set my destination path, back up here we go, right, that I want to set books to use as its inner XML. Okay, so let's run this in debug. And to run in debug, we start here in the VSTA window, and we make sure we've got a breakpoint. Breakpoint, just add it like this, and then we hit the Start Debugging button. Now, when we start debugging, what it's going to do is it's going to open up our form for us in preview mode. And you can see how my breakpoints are highlighted back there. And when I hit now, I set mine up so that it wouldn't have any data, so it wouldn't have any instances of the node in the main data source when I opened it. When we hit our transform button, what it's going to do is it's going to return us to our code window. So we hit transform. Yay, here we are in our code window. Now, once again, talking about using your tools so that you're not working blindly. This running in debug is huge, right? Because look, I can tell what my values of my variables are. I can look at this and I can say, oh, look, okay, that is that. So if I had some sort of crazy math going on or something like that, and I needed to know that it was actually occurring the way I wanted it to, I could hover over a variable. I could add a watch to a variable, and I could see what its actual value was at any given time. So, you know, now I've got this transform. I can find out all kinds of things about it. Right? I've got this XSLT doc. Did I load up the right thing? You know, what does the XML look like on this guy? Maybe I didn't get the right file, right? And so I've got this. You know, I can take a look at what I've currently got there. It's going to blank out on me because it doesn't like being moved for whatever reason. Buggy little creature. Let's do it one more time. Just so you can see. I do this a lot, you know, I do this a lot when I'm working on code for qRules, for other things. Run it in debug, take a look at what I've got here. It's like, oh, look at that. That's not what I expected. Or, oh, yeah, okay, that's right. Something else must be going wrong, right? So we've got our XSLT document loaded up. We've gone ahead and we're applying our transform to, right, the complicated data source, the complicated data node, using our string writer. Okay, and we step over this. Now at this point, our string writer should have some data in it. Right? He should be an XML string, and look at that, he is an XML string. You could again look at him and watch if you needed to. And now I'm setting the inner XML of books to this. Well, that's because, right, if we look at our string writer, you can see this as the right XML. It's my book. And if we set the inner XML of books to this, then what we're basically saying is, okay, our books node is now going to have all of these books, right? And we'll just go ahead and step over. And I'm going to go ahead and hit continue at this point. So now we've got all of these books, right? We applied our transform. And it made it much easier for us to copy our data in. We didn't have to, I mean, and even from a code perspective, quite frankly, it made it much easier for us to copy our data in. Even if you're accustomed to writing code for copying data from one data source to another, there's a lot of select single node this, select single node that, set value this, set value that, because you have to go and grab each node and set the value. And honestly, it's messy, kind of crufty stuff. I think it's a lot better to just use a transform. It's a lot cleaner. Let's break this. Bad syntax. I'm so spoiled. Okay, so I'm going to break this. I'm going to set my destination path, which, as we all know, is my books node. I'm going to set its outer XML to my return string, which is, as we know, book nodes. And that's going to break this. And what's going to happen, since we've got proper error handling here, we've got a try catch, we're going to catch our exception, is we should just have an error returned to our little error node, which I've helpfully put on the form. And so here's this error node in my form logic data source. And when I hit transform, we expect a failure. And the failure is schema validation found non-data type errors. Well, and the reason it found non-data type errors, right, is because, of course, the outer XML, setting that to these book nodes, is not going to be appropriate XML for our main data source schema, right? If we look at our main data source schema, what I've basically done is I've taken this guy and I've tried to put him right under my fields without him going inside of books, okay? So that's why that didn't work. And I'm going to go ahead and just stop this guy, and we'll fix him because I don't want to send him to you broken, right? And we'll look at the qRules one real quick, and then we'll have time for some questions. Yeah, I think I've covered about everything I wanted to on this one. Okay, so let's just drop this guy down, get him out of the way, and we'll get you those code files with the other samples. Now here's the qRules method. Yep, here's the qRules method. So this time I'm showing the error node from the Qdabra rules, and I'm using the transform command. So if we look at that rule, over here we go. Right, and so let me copy this out. It's just so hard to read there. And then we're going to look, oh, that's right. I did have one more thing to show you. Have to show you. Okay. Two things I have to show you. Okay, sorry, I hope everybody's got plenty of time. You saw my name on this and you're like, oh, this is going to run late. So anyway, here's the qRules command. It's the transform command. The first parameter is what's your XSLT file. It has to be a resource file. You've already seen that we have that in the resource file. What's our source data source? I even used kind of the same name for my variables in the code version just to kind of help you visualize, you know, the comparatives here. So my source data source is complicated data. My source path is the complicated data node, the root path. My destination path is this guy right here. ToString defaults to false. I had it in there because I was messing around with it because I didn't have this. If you're doing this for qRules, you need to, and actually the way I was doing it too for code, you need to make sure you omit the XML declaration. What does that mean? Well, if I don't omit the XML declaration, then when I execute this, I'm going to have the XML declaration right here. And I'll get a validation error, schema validation error, if I try to insert that in because you can't have two XML declarations in an XML file. Okay, so you'll want to make a note that you need to omit the XML declaration. So back to our qRules version. This is going to do exactly the same thing that we were doing. You know, we just preview it here and transform, right? And then off we go. It's transformed those. And pretty straightforward. As long as your transform is right, it's just going to work. So we'll include that file as well with the demo files. So I wanted to show you a couple of things. I had mentioned that, hey, it's good not to be uncomfortable with XSL because there's some things you can do in InfoPath with it if you are not uncomfortable with it. So just today or yesterday, I was working on a form, and in my form, I have email addresses. This is a little like report form I was working on that has information about our DBXL licenses, and I have in my data that I'm returning here, I have a field that's, let me drill down all the way, I have a field that's got email addresses. But, you know, wouldn't it be nice to have that be a hyperlink that the user could click and do a mail to? Sure. And so I could have, I guess, repurposed one of these columns, or I could have created a view that returned that as a mail to. But actually, what I went ahead and did was I just modified the hyperlink control here in the view. And it turns out that it, let me find the next one. Oh, you little, let's do it this way. Let's look, there we go. And it turns, I use find a lot in these things. I mean, these are long files, you know, so Control F is going to help you out there. So what I wanted to do was I found my hyperlink control here, and so I've got this hyperlink control. You can see my display here is customer email, and here's my href. And what I did was I just added a simple concat formula that's concatenating mail to with the email address, right? And so if you go and you look here at my hyperlink control, you can see that for my data source, and you and I both know InfoPath is only going to let me select the field here. You can see in my data source I've got this concat formula. And if I preview, and it's been round tripping just fine. I haven't had any problems with it. So I think I'm going to be doing that in the future rather than adding, you know, anything extra to handle these kinds of things, because, you know, now all of a sudden I've got a click to email link, and that's what I wanted, and I didn't have to do anything fancy or add anything to it. The other thing I wanted to show you was a preserve code block, just so you'd see what that looks like. And I happen to have one handy right here in our dreaded time card. Right? Okay, there's one right there. Okay, and so what we're doing here is we're grouping some things up, and InfoPath doesn't group for us, and so we're grouping up some data here. And when you actually look at this guy and you're filling him out for each, you know, area and project, you'd have a row, right? And this preserve code block is used to allow us to group things based on area and project. But as you can see, if I need to make changes to this, I can't do that here. Any changes to this section now have to be made inside the View XSL. So that's why I've got such a deep dislike for preserved code blocks. So I try to avoid any kind of view changes that require a preserved code block. I think they're high maintenance. I think they're a lot of work for whoever eventually works on your form. It's important to me to make sure that any form I hand off is not too brutal for other people to work on. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I've certainly taken up plenty of everybody's time. I'll go ahead and share out the slides again and go to the last slide. And you can contact us if you cancel. You can contact us if you would like these details. Marcy, I see had something here saying that screen sharing was lagging. I hope that wasn't too disturbing for anybody. And let me know if you have any questions. I'll hang on for a few minutes in case anybody does. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, that's cool. I'll get this stuff packaged up so that we've got it for you if you'd like it. I hope this was not too much information in too small of a time, and I really encourage you to try these things. Oh, yeah. You know, I'm sorry, we had somebody ask about references for transforming InfoPath XML to WordML. Personally, I would strongly discourage you from working on WordML at this point. It is frightful. I don't even know another word to describe WordML aside from frightful. Biz Support Online has some tutorials for leveraging the XML functionality of Word 2007 and 2010 to get you started on those types of transforms. I think exporting to PDF is better. That's just a few lines of code. You can do that pretty easily. I think the code required to export to PDF offhand, I think it requires full trust, but I'm not sure because I don't do it much. In general, I would say that I like InfoPath combined with SQL services, SQL reporting services for that kind of a thing. Because if your InfoPath data is going into a database, you can create a SQL Server report that will present it any way you'd like, and then you can render it that way in PDF. But yeah, I don't have a ton of resources for WordML, and I find it very hard to work with. Justin asked if what I was doing in the first part was copying data from the secondary data source to the main data source, and that's exactly right. Yes. So what I was trying to show was here is a much simpler way to copy data from a secondary data source into a main data source via transformations. Use a transform instead of doing a code copy where you're copying one node to another node. You insert a row, copy a value from one node to another node. I just think a transform is a much easier way to handle it. And then if you're using qRules at all and you're doing complicated data transfers where where your source data doesn't match your destination data, transform is a viable alternative to using like insert and fancy XPath to do your copying. So yeah, that was exactly what I was trying to get across, Justin. Yeah, you were totally following the idea. So anybody else have a question? If so, feel free to type one up, and if not, we'll wrap things up, and hopefully you guys feel more confident approaching this stuff. Just, again, as long as you're making backups of everything you're working with, approach things fearlessly. Just dig in there. You can do this stuff. It's not once you have some tools to help you figure out what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, it loses its mystery. So definitely find tools that will help you, and you can definitely figure this out. It's totally within your grasp. If you're working with InfoPath, this stuff is totally within your grasp. Okay, so I hope everybody has a great day, great week, and we'll get this stuff together for you so that you've got copies of it. Thanks for attending.